And so how did your photography or photographic career start?
I was born in 1970, and I was lucky enough that my parents got the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times through the 1970s was a fantastic photographic education. Every Sunday it would be the best photographers going would be there, and you would see their work and you would absorb it. I went to a Don McCullum exhibition when I kind of got back into photography, probably sort of 18 or 19, and all the images were so familiar because they'd kind of been seared into my head from seeing them in the Sunday Times. And I went back to look, and these were ones that were published about sort of 1974, 75, and I'd been 4 or 5 years old. But these images were really familiar to me. So there's obviously they had Don McCullum there. They also had a wonderful photographer who never gets her dues called Sally Soames, who was a portrait photographer. And she was absolutely excellent as well. And I think there was also a strike on the Sunday Times, and they stopped making it for a while. And I can remember that they luckily bought the Observer then for this period of time. So I got Jane Bones stuff. And it was kind of and obviously then you had the sort of Martin Parr coming in, Paul Rees, the colour stuff would come in. And it felt like you were seeing this in real time rather than studying it. I mean, this obviously in hindsight, looking back at it, but you know, I kind of think that was the best photographic education you could have, really. And in York, we had the Impressions Gallery, which means I'm really bad at names. So I'm the guy who did the Viking space experiment, whose colour stuff all shot round Leeds. He was a lorry driver. I remember in a bit Peter Mitchell's work that was shown there, and I can remember seeing it quite young and thinking, God, this is good. I can remember the colour stuff. I was more interested in it than wanted to shoot like it. I can remember not so much being unsure about it, but I didn't kind of aspire to that colour viewpoint. It took me a while to get into colour photography, I think. But, you know, seeing Peter Mitchell's work and things like that, and Martin Parr's early stuff, you were kind of, you know, that's pretty much where you want to be. And then from that, you kind of get a roadmap from discovering those photographers, and you have interviews with them, and they will say, oh, I do this because I like Stephen Shaw. And then you'll go and you'll look at Stephen Shaw's work, and it was really set. I kind of, my photography would kind of ran at parallel with an interest in music. So it was the sort of same thing. You'd buy the NME and you'd read about a musician you'd like, and he'd say, oh yeah, I was really influenced by Iggy Pop, the Stooges, or something like that. So you'd go out the next day and you'd try and track down these sort of American sort of garage rock bands and things. And it was similar with photography. It was because I think anybody young listening to this, and the internet wasn't there. It was, you had to make find somebody like Stephen Shaw. It was an absolute nightmare in Yorkshire. It was kind of, you know, it's a good place to live because there was a good contemporary photography scene, but stuff like that was difficult to find. William Eggleston, you know, it's hard. It was like tracking down the first Suicide album, which was really hard to find as well. And these things, you kind of had to make a lot more effort for it, and it was hellishly expensive to buy this stuff, you know, because obviously nobody really had sort of, you know, money and things like that at this point. So it was you had to save for this stuff. So you had to buy the right one. You had to buy the right book. Otherwise, you'd wasted your sort of 2 months' money and things like that. So, or you'd wasted your film money and things, and that was the worst part.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because I think I was given a gift actually when I was 16 It was a Book of Life, the magazine, and that was just, some of the stuff in there was just absolutely stunning, and it made you want to find out more, spend time in libraries looking at books and things. A tragic thing in my case is that I never took up photography until much later in life, professionally, that is. So when did you actually start doing work professionally, Brian?
It was pretty much after college, really. It's pretty much a lot of the time I've had to support myself, through doing additional jobs as well, and that's because a lot of my stuff doesn't make, or at that point didn't make enough money to live off, particularly in London. But I kind of ended up working for Corbis. God, let me think. I was probably about 30 when I started working for Corbis, and I worked there. I did a lot of their post-production and things. But all the time I was shooting, starting to get into magazines and things.
Do you remember your first gig?
Oh, God. The first thing I can remember doing on any sort of professional basis, I must have been about 15, there was a musician called Gary Marks that was in a band called the Sisters of Mercy, and this is Leeds local bands, and I kind of really cheekily found out their management company. I just phoned them up and just said, "Can I come and photograph your band? I'm really good." And they kind of went, "Yeah. Well, I'll just turn up at this point around the back and kind of knock on the door, ask for Nick." And just kind of, "Oh, okay. This is obviously how you do it." And it's kind of just always, be cheeky, and these are, you won't get that many. You have to make your own opportunities, I think. And I kind of realised sort of early on. I've worked for music magazines on and off for years and years and years.
And you were a roadie as well.
Yes, that was when I was at university. It's you could kind of, because the student grants were just being phased out at the time. I paid my way through university basically by working on the sort of local road crews. That's kind of where I got my love for speakers from. I would work with this. There was it would always be local PA companies, and this was from the West Midlands, and most of these were from Birmingham, where there was obviously a great big reggae scene, and bass speakers were, there was a big, everybody had to have the best ones. So quite often these PAs that you turn up would be handmade, and there'd be some band, and they were all hired out. So you'd put them up, and you just think, "Oh, that looks beautiful." That's just fantastic looking there, and there was the guy that used to own the PAs was a bloke who was very unlikely. His name was Shirt, and that was all his name was, Shirt. So and the trouble is, Shirt had such a thick Brummie accent. I literally had no idea what he was ever saying to me, but he would sit there and talk about his speakers until the cows came home, but I had no idea what he was actually saying. So I used to just sort of smile and nod and things, but you kind of got to learn how beautiful these things were and kind of how imposing they were, and that just kind of obviously stuck with me. I think this happens quite a lot, that you end up with this scrapbook in your head of things that you've seen, and they pop back and you refer to them. And I mean, I did a picture of artist called an author called Amy Liptrot, who wrote a fantastic book called The Outrun, which kind of got every award going, which is brilliant. I took a photograph of her, and then I realised I'd kind of referred to the girl with the pearl earring, but I referred to it how I remembered it, which was when you kind of look at what the original is. It's not a copy, because you refer to the thing that's in your head. So that's always a big piece of advice I give out to people, is if you're interested in portraiture or landscape, just don't look at photographs. Go and look at every painting, every representation you can find of this, because this is all really good reference material.
Yeah, I'm sort of jumping in on you there, but one of the greatest influences. I hated school. It was it was a horrendous experience. I disliked it intensely, but and I was always late to school. I had to walk to school, and the art master, whose name was Mr. Snelling, was also very late. Going to school, but we kind of got on very well, and he would lend me books about Rembrandt and Caravaggio and all these things, and they do kind of sink into your head, and you kind of remember these things, and looking at paintings is one of the joys, really, and usable in a photographic sense as well. And you know, the portrait you have of Amy is an absolute delight. I'm friends with Amy on Twitter and things, and we talked a lot. And when she was writing a book, I used to communicate quite a lot with her when she was up north, and it was very interesting. And I really wanted to photograph her myself, but you got there first, man.
Yeah, there was actually something really, I think it was kind of depressing. I think somebody get kind of lots of students writing to you and things, which is nice. But I can remember one guy wrote to me and said, I'm in London. Is there anything you recommend to go in to see? And there was a Caravaggio show was on the National Portrait Gallery, and I was going to say, go to see that because it's fantastic, you know. And he was like, no, I'm only interested in photographs. And I was like, oh no, that's so sad. Don't go and see a third-rate photography show when you can go and see these paintings, because I know you're interested in photography, but these will give you so much more of a grounding. They will give you so much more information. They will make your heart sing. They will make your heart leap. They will stretch you in ways that photographs can't. You know, go look at more art. Everybody go look at more art.
I'm really fascinated by how you approach your portraiture and your client. I don't know if I've said this before. I probably have, Brian. So, but anyway, I'm going to say it again. But I kind of think that portraiture is they're almost self-portraits in a weird sort of way. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, or whether I'm talking absolute nonsense. But how do you approach your portraiture work? Well, I wouldn't say tricks. That's being a bit disparaging. But what style and how do you go about working with a person in order to get what you want from them?
I never really won for equipment. That's definitely one thing. I'll go through a few things that I've done and the way that I approach them, because I think it's all kind of quite different. I did a thing where I photographed 100 war veterans that were all shot on Armistice Day over a period of 10 years. So there was kind of lots of things, like time was important with that, and when they were taken, and the date. Obviously Armistice Day, what was going on in their heads would be very different from what was going on in their heads other days. So that was important to put that there was kind of that was happening, and the fact that this was the day that they were there to remember their experiences. But they were probably reliving what they had seen, but they were also with their comrades, or their remaining comrades. So there was this kind of dichotomy of happy and sad going on, which is interesting. And these kind of things that are complicated interest me far more than things that are simple, but only in the kind of what's going on internally with them. I like a complex internal photograph, which is photographed very simply. I don't like lots of equipment. I virtually everything I shoot is shot with one light source and maybe a reflector, because I only own one light and I only own one reflector. And I think more than one light is advertising photography, and I'm not interested in advertising photography. So I kind of like, and you can do a lot with one light, and you can do a lot with the reflector as well. and you can mix that with daylight. I'm not that massively into the technical aspect of it, but you kind of have to know how light works. And again, look at paintings. You know, there's very few light sources in paintings. That's one thing, and learn that, and get that into your head for doing it. So again, very simple, and I kind of have an idea what's going on. Sometimes I can't tell the person particularly about it because I need to let them fall into it so it becomes natural. If you tell somebody, look a bit sad, you know, that's rubbish, isn't it? You know, you kind of have to direct the conversation slightly into those kind of areas. You're almost trying to get, but it's very much a collaboration. You kind of have to, it's good when your subject kind of gets what you're doing and things that can but again, the sort of things pull out from your head and you end up doing them. It's kind of like the picture of I did a photograph of Wilko Johnson, which is diptych, and it's one of its the one panel. It's the story was he'd been given the diagnosis of terminal cancer, and he'd kind of put out a statement where he was incredibly brave facing this. And a music magazine called Uncut sent me down to photograph him. And I sort of had this idea, shoot him for that. But it's these kind of jobs, I would always retain the copyright because I would photograph him for the magazine, but I would also photograph him for myself. So what went in the magazine would be my picture, but my picture would be the one that I would have. And it's quite difficult to get magazines to do that, or kind of even understand where you're coming from. Saying, I want that. I know what you want for the magazine, and I'll give you that, but I'm going to do this as well, kind of thing. And sometimes it's very difficult because you don't have that much time. So maybe you have to combine the two.
Coming back to your, the photographs of the veterans. What's striking to me about them is the pathos and the eyes and the genuineness of the people you photographed, and I think that's the power of that series for me. I mean, I've not seen an exhibition of them, but looking at them on the web. And they kind of remind me of, they remind me of my father, actually. He was, a war veteran. And it's that when they remember, when they are thinking in that way, it's something that is indescribable, really. But how much time did you spend with them, Brian?
3 frames. Tops, it's very, very quick. For some, because you don't want to take up anybody's time. They're not there to be photographed. That's the thing, They're there to remember their comrades and spend time with their comrades. So you really don't want to be obtrusive at all. But everybody agreed to be photographed who's there, But very few people didn't want to. I mean, obviously everybody's asking because. I don't believe in photographing people, but certainly portraits. It's a collaboration. The person kind of has to want to be photographed. But again, very, very simple. I would explain why I was doing it, and I would take 3 frames tops from it. And it started off this idea. There was God, when I was thinking about it, there was a thing called it's a film director called Lars von Trier, who's since been, I think thrown out to the Academy and everything. But he started this idea of dogma films, which was films that were made to certain rules. You would only use this camera and one lens, and I liked that idea of restricting yourself. So the equipment thing didn't really come into it. it was one camera, one lens, for the whole lot, and it was that 80mm length shot throughout. I think that the thing that was the most difficult about it was the fact that I didn't give any names or backstories to it, because I kind of wanted that feeling that when you see a huge war memorial and you just see names, and I kind of wanted to do that with faces, and I didn't want anybody to be somehow graded in terms of bravery and things. I wanted the guy that flew the Spitfires to be on an absolute equal footing to the squadron, which was mainly women that used to deliver the planes to the air, and people's stories were there, and they were out there, and I thought, I just want to do this to be very simple, leave faces, and these people were people that were at Armistice Day and who had served, and that was pretty much what it was.
You refer, I think, when you first started the project, you did some World War One veterans and then World War Two veterans. Were you tempted at all to do veterans from sort of present-day conflicts at all, or is that something that you've got in mind for future reference?
Well, there were people from, I think there were certainly people from the Korean War, certainly people from the Falklands in there. It was meant to be. It was kind of meant to be completely democratic. That was the idea, that there was kind of, because I think bravery occurs when people are put into a certain situation, and I didn't. And some people just weren't put into that situation, and if you worked around the clock to make sure the Spitfires got out and things like that I wanted all this to be equal. So I didn't want people to linger on the one person that had done X, Y, and Z over the top of somebody else. Just because there seemed to be quite a lot of those stories going around where people sort of describe. I kind of wanted it to be very photographic.
You're talking one of the videos that I watched that it was you became ill after one. For goodness sake, it was you relate a story about it raining and the following day you got pneumonia. I mean, but did you? I mean, a long-term project like that. Because people change and styles change, and how did you keep that sort of continuity of photographic work going through? Did you have that locked into your head from the very start?
It was pretty much locked in from the first. Once I just happened to be in London on Armistice Day with a Nikon camera and an 80mm lens. And it kind of started from there, and then from that I thought, okay, this is a project for it. And I thought, okay, it's going to be 100 pictures, it's going to be 10 years. And once I'd got that framework in, it's okay. But when you're on year 8 and it's chucking it down with rain, that's it. You've got to get it done. Otherwise, it's 10. You've messed up your 10-year project and things. So you kind of have to see it through.
So how did you cope with that rainy day?
I just got wet, That was it. I'm from Wales and I was brought up in Yorkshire. I'm kind of used to it raining. But the more important thing is it's you keep the cameras working. That's I had I one of the first things that I shot, which I thought, actually I'm onto something here, was May Day in 2000 or 2001. 2001, I think it was, where everybody got kettled in. Kettling is a term where the police basically surround a protest and don't let anybody out. And it was kind of a new technique then, and because I didn't have a press card, I was just going down and I was interested what happens at these sort of things. And sort of pretty much early on, I realised I'm not interested in this from a kind of news point of view. I'm interested in it as a spectacle, as an event, or it was like street theatre, pretty much, because you'd be sat there, you'd see the police change rapidly into their riot gear, and you'd kind of have this sort of, they were all black like stormtroopers, but you'd have this sort of little window of humanity that they were looking out through at you, and I thought that's quite interesting. So I kind of started shooting the police, photographing the police around it, because I photographed quite a lot of demos, and I was never massively interested in what anybody was demonstrating about particularly. It was the kind of slight oddness of the event occurring in the streets, and that was fascinating to me.
Did you find yourself, was your camera your protection from, isolated you from the actual events itself?
Yeah, sometimes it does. It kind of gives you a reason to be there, and it gives you a reason to look at things, and that's photography in general, and that's kind of one of the joys of it, because I'm a really shy person, and it kind of gives me an excuse to look at stuff, whereas if I've got a camera, because I can go and take a photograph of it, and it kind of allows me to do that, or allows myself to do that. But sometimes you kind of get a weird sixth sense at these kind of things, when you know you're going to be all right. Sometimes I'm going to be fine today, it's going to be great, I'm going to go right at the front, and people throw bricks at me, none of them will hit me. And you're kind of all right. And then some days you go, ooh, I'm not feeling this today. I'm going to hang back a bit. And occasionally I'd had an operation, so I had stitches in once at one thing, and I can't remember what it was. But because I'd kind of been told that you can't, I couldn't be in a crush, basically. So I kind of followed this event like about 2 minutes behind everybody else, when everybody goes. So I got this really weird set of pictures, which were really fascinating, because they were what happens just when this sort of riot thing. I've got people using a cash machine when the entire bank has been smashed up around it, and it's kind of like the sort of aftermath. I think the protesters brought sort of paintballing guns, I think, so they all paintballed the police and then ran off. And I kind of got there when the police were just like, what just happened? Covered in paint, and that was kind of quite an interesting thing to do about it. Again, I can't remember what anybody was protesting about.
There's one photograph you have as well, which is again with the police with their visors down, but they're female police officers, which I find that kind of softens things in a strange way.
It's interesting, just because you only see that, you only tend to see people's eyes once the riot gear's on, and that was the thing that was fascinating. And you could get, I think there's a shot with this three. I've got one of three policemen, and they all look like absolutely different characters in it, even though all you have, the stormtrooper riot uniform. And all you get to see is this little space around their eyes where the balaclava's not covered, and that was the thing that kind of went, actually, this is what I'm interested in. This little visor of humanity that I can see people. This is what I'm going to photograph.
There's another lovely photograph of a guy sitting on the floor with a riot police in front of him and the word left on it, and he looks really indifferent to what's going on, as if he's being caught in a maelstrom that he doesn't quite understand, and the guy flicking a V at you as well. I mean, how do you react to sort of aggressive nature of the protesters? Because protesters can be quite aggressive towards photographers. I've found out to myself, they can be quite intimidating sometimes.
Some days, you feel nothing's going to happen to you, and some days you think, I'm going to hang back. So I've never really particularly let that sort of, I just try and be nice to everyone I meet. I'm nice to the police, I'm nice to the protesters, and I mean, I'm kind of there, don't mind me. I'm just invisible, Get on with whatever you're doing today, I think that's the thing. I mean, I think being nice is so underrated. That's the thing, You could, especially doing portrait things. I find really odd. Some photographers are really odd and kind of get quite shirty with their subjects, where it's. I mean, sometimes you have musicians that do need a bit of discipline, and stand there, shut up. But
have you had any difficult gigs with musicians?
Oh yeah, lots of people don't want their photo taken.
Why do you think that is so?
It's generally because they're quite shy. I think that's one of the things that people sort of kind of don't. There's band Jesus Mary Chain, who I did a portrait of, which is in the National Portrait Gallery in Scotland at the moment, and they used to have a terrible reputation for being violent and having these really violent gigs, and I think it mainly became because they were quite shy. They would have a drink before going on stage, and again, but bands like that, they're seeped in this whole imagery of rock and roll. They know it, they grew up on the NME. They knew all those great the Anton Corbins. They know what good imagery looks like, and they'll give it to you. That's the thing, because they know it. They know it as much as you do. They know what a good photograph is, and quite often, and they don't have anything to prove. They're great. It's when people kind of haven't made that jump yet. You sometimes get, because they automatically think, oh, I should be treated in this way, and you kind of. It's kind of that there isn't the money left in the music business to treat you in that way, unfortunately, anymore. Because again, like sort of publishing, the money there is next to nothing, and but I people sometimes lose the idea that you're there. Your job is to make them look good, and if you haven't made them look good, you don't look good either. So that, and that's kind of a fundamental thing that a lot of people kind of lose sight of. That they think in some way the photographer's going to stitch them up, and you're like, if you look crap, I look crap. That's the thing. But then you get you occasionally with music things, you get really odd things. I had somebody sent I think in quite often from you have sort of PRs. And they'll say, "Oh yeah, can you do the photograph? We've got somebody here for your photograph." And you go, "Okay, you've got any ideas for it?" And they say, "Oh yes, we'll shoot like this." And they'll send you lots of pictures of Keith Richards from 1973, or the 1975 Stones tour, when he was looking fantastic and thin, and he was that photograph of him signed like with the drug-free America sign. And he's obviously off his head, leaning against all this brilliant Rolling Stone. I think it's Annie Leibovitz pictures. And you go like that, and they go, "Oh yeah, you want it to look like that?" And you go, "Okay, who am I photographing?" And they'll send you a picture of a bloke who looks like a potato, and you're kind of there's only so far, by sending these pictures, you're going to be disappointed. He's going to be disappointed on things like that. But you kind of have to be realistic with things here. Now, there's no reason you can't make this a great picture. I mean, look at Frank Black from the Pixies, who's kind of a big bloke, but rock and roll. That's the thing. He looks fantastic, and it's kind of just expecting somebody then to instantly become Keith Richards. It's kind of you get that very rarely, to be fair, but that's the difficulty that sometimes you get. Yeah.
Do you find PR companies are that their expectations of what you can actually do are sometimes overinflated?
It's the same as anything. It's good. You get absolutely fantastic ones, and in the majority, most of them are great. I know lots of lovely PR people who kind of get it. But they've also, but it is the people that have kind of grown up reading the NME that have kind of done their lifetime of homework. That's a thing that's really important. It's kind of is to be this, suck all this stuff in, and retain it, because it will always come out. I was talking earlier about doing the Wilko one, and there was a picture that just popped into my head to do it, where I wanted to do it, and it was the death mask of William Blake, which is the sculpture of it, the actual sort of death mask of him. And because he was ill, I kind of thought this could maybe work as William Blake and Wilko Johnson. But I felt there was a connection there, and it was kind of like, I didn't tell him I wanted it, but I saw at one point his face relaxed and he closed his eyes and bang, I kind of had that picture in mind. And then I did a colour version of it, and it sort of sat around, and then I realised I'd kind of lit it. It was all lit in the same way as Francis Bacon's painting of the death mask of William Blake. And I didn't have any of this to refer to, because I think that's the really bad idea, is when you refer to stuff and try and copy it. If you've got it in your head, you kind of make these referrals to it, and you don't get it quite right, but because you're not copying it, it's like you're trying to remember something. You're kind of grasping at these memories and putting those in, and you realise, that's where that came from then. And it was kind of, because I wasn't even sure that I remember the Bacon painting, but I only realised that there's a show on at the moment, or just been on, that it was in there, and I only realised that it was a study of the death mask of William Blake. Whereas I just thought it was, I kind of thought it was something from the Pope series or something like that. But I find all this stuff really important to sort of suck in, and you've got this scrapbook in your head of things you can refer to, and you can put these little tiny bits in that people will maybe get or not get, or it'll.
I think the first photographs I saw, I guess when I joined Twitter, I suppose, were your Billy Childish series, which just mind-blowing series. What sort of guy was he?
Oh, he's lovely. He's really, really nice. That's I think he was kind of. He was. Let me think what happened. There was my friend Phil, who actually plays in lots of bands. Drove me down there because I think he wanted to meet him as well, and he's a filmmaker. He shoots on Super 8, so he made a bit of a film of it, which I think is on YouTube. And I'd been. It wasn't really a commission, was it? It was something for an American magazine, where they said, "Can you go and photograph somebody who you find inspiring?" And I thought, I've been talking about Billy Childish. I just kind of liked the way that he just went out and did things. Kind of, he didn't feel like he'd asked permission to do these, or he kind of hadn't been to all the art schools, and he hadn't studied English. But he was he was a poet, and he's a published poet, and he's a really good poet. And he's an artist, and he's a really good artist. And there were these things that he just went and did, and I found that incredibly inspiring. And we went in Phil's old Renault 5 down to Chatham, where Billy lived, and we were kind of. He knew Phil through playing in garage bands and things, so him and Phil got on okay. And I used to have a shonky old Land Rover, and Billy used to have an old Land Rover. So we bonded over Land Rovers, basically, and Land Rover gearboxes without synchro mesh and stuff like that. And no, he's tremendously. Again, Billy knows imagery. He knows how to be photographed, and we had lots of ideas. I noticed he had this fantastic hat collection, best hat collection in Chatham. He had so we kind of did lots of pictures of him wearing hats, and I think that's kind of one of the things. Billy Childish is really funny, And I think he's one of those people. I like that people that kind of do really serious art, but there's quite a lot of humour behind it, which a lot of people don't see. That was a kind of I kind of the band of my youth growing up in Leeds was this band called the Sisters of Mercy, who were like, everybody thinks, oh yeah, goths, miserable. They were hilarious. They were utterly ridiculous. Everybody would think they were miserable, and they would go out in their concerts and they would play ABBA songs, and and kind of nobody really got the joke, which I kind of like. And in some ways, I think Billy Childish had that level of humour underneath things, which I think is important to. And humour's really difficult to do in work. It's kind of I can't think of very many people that have added humour into art and photography particularly well. I mean, there probably are lots and lots of examples I can't think of, or because I'm sure it's humour is so subjective. I think street photography always has it, but
it's really interesting that you've gone back to your to the sound systems, and that you've been doing screen prints and things of them. What was the thinking behind that?
There's a couple of reasons. There's a couple of guys called Tartaruga, who is Josh from the FT magazine, and Max, who's a screen printer, approached me about doing something with it. And I love to collaborate with lots of people. I love doing things like this. And they were saying, we don't want to do, we do screen prints. And I'd always loved the Andy Warhol Disaster series. I kind of you always have these sort of artists that you like when you're quite young, about sort of 15 or something, that they're the kind of gateway drugs into art. And Warhol was always one of those that I really liked. And even now, the Disaster series I absolutely love. These are ones where he did very early on in his career. They're pictures of automobile accidents and sort of shooting. Then they were all screen printed. They were quite heavy, and I loved that idea of those. And I sort of was telling Max about that, and Max kind of got that idea. And the fact that loads of posters for reggae stuff was always screen printed at the time of those. So it kind of seemed to fit, and it seemed to take the picture somewhere else, which wasn't, it was good fun to do. That was the thing. It's something different. I'm never particularly afraid of doing anything different, and because it was an odd thing, because we would make a box of screen prints. We've got a box of screen prints now that are for sale, and it's £100 for this screen printed box, and there's 6 screen prints in it, and they're all held in place with the foam you get in recording studios. So everything's kind of been thought about, and it's quite fun. But it's an odd thing because something like that hasn't really existed before. It was really difficult to find a price point for it, because to buy an actual photographic print from me of the sound systems is very expensive now, because they've been collected. But the screen prints, I always felt, was a nice way for people who to get into the idea of being able to buy something. That's a thing, and something that's handmade, and again something that's quite different. So in terms of value for money, they're ridiculously good value for money. The photographic prints kind of fall into the pricing of photography now, which is very difficult to get out of. You kind of have to. The market sets your prices to a certain degree, and if you go, and this is a way of kicking against that, but without kicking against it. If it's kind of like a feeder diffusion or something like that line underneath that idea, because downpricing your work doesn't do you any favours, and kind of it's that's almost sort of a tied up thing. If most photographers find that.
To jump ahead and to talk a little about your landscapes, the Brighter Later series is an interesting concept and sort of right and left eye work.
That actually goes back to Wales. Actually, I was in my stag for a funeral, and somebody came up to. I don't think it was an auntie, but it might have been. Came up and said, "I'm really glad you've stopped doing that thing with your eyes." And I was kind of like, "What was that?" And you go, "You used to look at something with one eye, like, with your hand over it, then look at it from the other and do that." And I was kind of, I used to do that. I can remember that now. And then I thought, oh, that's interesting, because it's kind of like deconstructing your binocular vision. So I thought this might be interesting to make some photos like that. So it took a little while to work out how to do it and how to do it in a way that was feasible. Lots of experimentation, found the way that, and it kind of seemed to fit quite nicely for landscapes. And I use it quite a lot. And I found myself looking at landscapes using one eye and using the other.
Why did you choose seascapes?
I kind of had this idea that lots of people did studies of Britain looking in, and I kind of wanted this idea of Britain looking out and being this kind of island race that went out and explored and saw endless possibilities and the endless possibilities of travel and everything. So I liked that idea. I kind of thought they'd all look the same, which kind of amused me. I like this idea of Britain, this portrait of Britain where everything looked exactly the same. I thought that's quite a funny idea to do that. That didn't happen at all, because it all looked completely different. In fact, I showed these to somebody, and they, despite the fact it was just sea and light, they identified where the picture was taken from the light within basically 4 miles, which was kind of, that's kind of amazing, because obviously that light has had so much effect on you, and I'm really pleased because I've managed to catch it, to the fact that you can remember what it looked like 20 years ago when you were there as a kid. So it was kind of interesting, and I like projects that have got a stop and a start, which stopping projects I found is difficult. But now, since Brexit, I've kind of changed my mind. You see, I just see now, seeing those pictures, I just see borders now, and it's been interesting how, rather than an outward looking nation, it feels like that was something that from a long time ago. I kind of haven't got my feelings completely straight in my head about it, but it's definitely changed.
I think it's a Japanese photographer, and I forget his name, but he talks about seascapes as being the only vista that you look at that hasn't changed in millennia. And that I find fascinating in itself. And I've worked a bit with pinhole stuff, looking out overseas, and you're quite right. You can look at a vista and know exactly where it is. It's very because it appears bland, but it's not. It speaks all the time, Did you pick days? You visited obviously a lot of places.
The only way I could afford to do it was to book the train months in advance. If you were going to Penzance, I went to Penzance for, I think it was about an hour and a half to do it, and I kind of to me it didn't matter. I'd just go there and I would photograph what was there, and that was kind of I wasn't looking for anything beautiful or incredible scenes of light or anything like that. It was what was there. That was kind of the important part of it. you know, it just had to be honest and truthful. It was kind of, I wasn't going to wait until the sort of you had Stormlight or anything like that. It was what you see is what you got.
Why did you pick Conway in Wales?
Because I had this A to Z map of coastal counties, and it was on there, and I managed to do all of North Wales, I think, in a day or 2 days, which was kind of quite, you know. What was actually really handy was the fact that the Highlands is so big in Scotland, because that would have been. So there seemed to be lots of different things about counties as well. So I thought, I'm just going to get a map, and this is going to be where it's coming from. So because we could have gone on for debating about different counties and former counties, but it's lots of places I went were really. I went to Barry Island. Do you know Fred West's ashes are there?
No, you're kidding me.
Yeah, no, seriously. That's I ended up, everywhere I went ended up being weird, and I didn't go there because it was weird. I just because I started to write a diary after I'd shot it for the Caught by the River website, and God, I went somewhere in Scotland, and they burnt more witches there than anybody else had done in the whole of Europe, and it was kind of like, you know, the number one witch burning destination, and all these slightly odd place. You know, Stonehaven I went, where they invented the deep fried Mars bar on the ballpoint pen or something. There was kind of lots of really weird things that you found out, but then you realise the whole country's weird, which is brilliant about it, you know.
Have you been tempted to come back and shoot a lot of stuff in where your family is from? Have you been tempted to come back to Maesteg? And
Yes, I have. It's been in my mind for a number of years, and I haven't quite got to grips. I've made a few things where I was going to sort of start photographing lots of Welsh musicians and places where they'd been, and it sort of started off okay, and it's not quite there yet. It'll come. I'm kind of I've kind of learnt now not to force these things. The idea will come.
Yeah, and it's funny how ideas also come from something you've worked on in the past, and you kind of, it's that remembering thing again going on, isn't it? And you know, at the time it wouldn't be right to do that sort of work, you know, or.
Quite a lot of stuff is half remembered, and I like that thing of half remembering things, because it kind of gives everything a little bit of a fuzzy edge, and it's not quite as defined, and there's plenty of room for the project to sort of grow and move.
Yeah. On Beachy Head, a classic example of what you are interested in. I mean, again, lots of poignant stuff in that. And the whole landscape and the mistiness of it all, and
it's really multifaceted place. It's a really complicated place. I like photographing things that, even though I photograph them in black and white, sometimes are not black and white. You know, there's with Beachy Head, it's the most beautiful place you've ever been to, but it's the third most popular suicide destination in the world. But it's incredibly beautiful, it's lovely, and there's loads of wildlife there, and some days you'd go. I photographed it over. I said I was going to do a year there, but because of Southern Rail strike, I gave myself an extra 2 months because it became really difficult to get down there. So I just would go and visit it whenever I had time, and it was first time I kind of went there. It's kind of I was always on the first train out of London, so it was 6 o'clock, 5 something in the morning, and I would get there and I would get a cab up to Beachy Head. And first time I was there, the cab driver you noticed they check you out in the rear view mirror. Apparently there's some code that they can type in onto their radio thing, because this happens a lot, and it's kind of, in some ways, it's quite reassuring that people are having this training there, and there's a chaplaincy that patrol The head just looking out for people, checking that people are all right, and they do, regardless what you think about religion, they do an amazing job. They're fantastic people. The number of lives they've saved is huge. But you could see that the cab driver was checking you out, and oh, you're going to Beachy Head then? It's a bit early in the morning. You go, oh, and you kind of as soon as you sort of say, oh yeah, I'm going up there, photograph and things like that, and oh right, okay, and they go yeah, and I could then sort of kind of clocked what was going on, and sort of then started showing him cameras and stuff like that. So it was kind of then he was fine with it, and then I just learned to go in full walking gear and Gore-Tex because there's so many hikers there like that. If you're a hiker, even though you're wearing kind of bright orange Gore-Tex, you're kind of invisible. Quite often I would just have a lovely day bird watching, and you know, some days you'd go and it would be the most peaceful, beautiful place in the world, and sometimes you'd go there and it wasn't, and there'd been the more times you went, the easier it became obvious when something was wrong. And I think probably the third or fourth time I was just walking down the cliff, and I found somebody's bag that had just been left there. That was full of empty vodka bottles and a pile of their clothes. And I was kind of went back and told the Coast Guard and the chaplaincy are there, so I went back and reported that straight away, and it turned out that somebody had gone over the cliff. It was kind of that point you sort of realise, no, this is an important thing to do, and it's important that people talk about this stuff because it's difficult. I mean, we now have sort of, I think it was the other day, we had Suicide Awareness Day, which is good. And just all these things, people need to talk about this stuff, and you know, the people that worked on the chaplaincy that patrol the cliffs, you know, they save people's lives, which is incredible, and you kind of realise this stuff should be documented in some way because it's important. It's important stuff, but not in any way where just do it honestly. Don't nothing needs to be just photographed honestly what's going on there, because it's kind of important. And you'd find it was almost like forensic sort of levels of detail. You'd find yourself, you'd be there and you'd sort of be walking along, and then you'd sort of see like a desire line where somebody had walked up to the edge of the cliff, and you were kind of, well, that could be they've just gone to the edge of the cliff to have a look. But there's all these things that in Beachy Head have a very different context. Train tickets. I found a return portion of a train ticket that hadn't been used, you know. And quite often I found cigarette packets where, you know, there'd been 2 or 3 cigarettes smoked, just on the edge, and somebody could have dropped it, but in the context of the place.
Yeah, and it's the crosses as well, isn't it? I mean, and we become, and if you go up the Rhondda, for example, you will see lots of crosses and flowers being left on barbed wire and stuff, and tied to lampposts and things. And I did a lot of work on it. There's one particular one near Tonopandi, which has become a huge shrine, and it's everything on it is blue. It's astonishing, and there's this crystal angel that's been taped to a tree, you know, with gaffer tape. Photographed that quite a lot, and it would be added to. It would be something you would need to return to and see what's been added to it. Obviously, the guy, and there's a picture of the guy there as well, and those faded photographs, you know, that have sort of. And you see them on Menai Bridge is another place where you get lots of flowers tied to the railings there, and faded photographs of people.
We need to talk about these issues more as a society, and sometimes having photographs of things like that can make it easier for people to talk about them, and then they can talk about their situation. I had, you know, quite a few people write to me about Beachy Head stuff. They're saying, I was there when I was a difficult part of my life. It's really interesting to see this, and I'm very glad that I'm still here. You know, that's kind of, you know, and it's sort of important to have that sort of thing. But it's and I mean, there's lots of really odd reporting restrictions around Beachy Head. I had to do some interview on the radio about it, and we couldn't use the word suicide, we couldn't use the word death, we couldn't use the word dark. We kind of ended up having to do this sort of ridiculous dance around the subject, which kind of, you know, it felt like we should be able to talk about these things like that. Obviously people are worried about, and I think it does, you know, sort of news reports tend to be quite sensational. You know, it's kind of interesting to look at because when I was doing the research on this, you find the local papers are a lot more sensitive than the nationals. Nationals, it's death plunge, and there's this kind of odd language around suicide. But the local papers, because they have to deal with this more, report it far more sensitively.
Have you completed that project now, Brian?
Yeah. That was we did a book with Ian Sargent's Another Place Press, which was quite nice, and we're going to do a little exhibition of this coming soon. Hopefully that's going to be in November, but all the details of that have to be sorted out. But that will be on Twitter and etc. and things.
So, have you got any other projects that are sort of bubbling beneath the surface that you're thinking about at the moment?
I did this weird thing, which was again about. I was watching TV with my wife, and the American version of War of the Worlds came on, with and it was with Tom Cruise, and it was set in New York, and you know, lots of things were blowing up, and it was very exciting, and Tom Cruise was running around being Tom Cruisey, and halfway through it, I was thinking, I'm sure this is actually set in Woking. And my dad bought me a copy of the book, so you know, when I was a kid, so I spent the rest of the time when the film was on looking for this book. I was thinking, it is set in Woking. This is kind of it's so the fun thing was, it's obviously based on H.G. Wells hating where he lived, and hating the commute into London, and hating all the places that the train stopped. And he obviously hated golf and he basically found all these places that he wrote them in and had Martians blow them up or destroy them in some way. And the good thing, because he was very specific about this, you could go and track these places down that were destroyed by Martians. So I kind of wandered around the sort of southwest of that, and it was kind of, you know, these are the most boring. It was quite funny to have this very boring golf course, where in his book, this is where the Martians use their heat ray to destroy a battalion of soldiers on this spot. So I kind of like the idea. This is also when Trump was here, so we were kind of getting the first thing of fake news coming in. So I kind of like the fake news aspect of almost doing this sort of. There's a lot of very popular landscape of conflict type series of photographs that people are photographing battlefields. So I like the idea of being able to combine that with fake news and photograph these places that did exist, but that had been laid to waste by the Martian invaders. And you know, and there was kind of like places like Shoebury-Ness and things which is where the cover of the famous Jeff Lynne War of the Worlds album, which everybody's parents had in the 1970s. I found the location where he said that actually happened and photographed that. So yeah, it's quite a boring seascape, but with the captions are all this and this spot. You know, this is where the third cylinder of the Martian invasion landed. It's like it's like Bushy Park or something like that. It's Mortlake is some sort of really commuters but based bit of London. That kind of amused me to do that. So I'll finish that. And I'm what am I doing? I'm doing a book of musician portraits with a writer called Joe Muggs, and the idea of that is it's mainly Joe's interviews with them, but we had the idea. This shows how late this book is. It was going to be at the start of punk, and punk musicians often would do gigs with reggae musicians as well, because they both found it really difficult to get gigs, and there weren't any punk records out. So you'd have the Sex Pistols would play, and the DJ obviously had no punk records to play, so they'd get reggae guys in and they would play reggae tunes. So there was this kind of overlap, and it was the 40th anniversary of punk, and everybody was kind of saying, yay, punk. But it was kind of like punk music didn't really massively develop. But if you follow the reggae guys that did stuff with, the Dennis Bavals and things like that, you kind of get this other strand of British music, which comes more through the sort of dancehall and reggae, and it ends up doing grime and dubstep and all these sort of different genres. But they come from this place. So we've been photographing lots of different musicians. I think the oldest one's 78, the youngest one's about 15, I think. So this huge breadth of and it's really generational as well. So this book is going to be published hopefully next year, and I think that the publisher's just done a deal with MIT in Boston, so I think it's going to get quite a lot of distribution and things like that. So it's going to come out through an academic publisher. So that's kind of interesting, but that's kind of taken so long to do. I'm also photographing landscapes, and I'm going to do one tomorrow actually, where artists got inspiration from. So and it's kind of quite vague in terms of lots of things I do start and don't finish, don't see the light of day. These things, this might not, I don't know. It's kind of, there's a point where you kind of decide some things are more successful than others, but it'll lead to something else. So I've kind of done things like Cookham, where Stanley Spencer grew up. I've done the Whittington clumps, where Paul Nash did lots of painting and things. Since discovered, he actually very rarely went up there. He used to paint them through binoculars. He would look at them from the binoculars of his house and paint them, apparently, which is kind of fascinating. So the British artist John Piper, I've kind of did some shots. He did some paintings around Eastbourne, so I tried to work out where they were. Yeah, possibilities are endless. It's just having enough time.